She had married for love, believing her husband to be a kind and humble man. Their life together was simple, filled with quiet moments of joy and devotion. But what she never knew was that the man she called her husband was far more than he had ever let on. He was a king. As fate unraveled his secret, she found herself standing before a throne she never imagined was hers. Would she embrace the destiny she had unknowingly walked into, or would the weight of royalty shatter the love they had built? Aisha woke to the soft golden light filtering through the wooden shutters of their small home. The gentle hum of birds filled the air, blending with the faint sound of water being poured outside. She stretched, feeling the warmth of the morning settle around her before rising to begin the day. She found Idris in the courtyard, kneeling by the small garden they had planted together. His hands, strong yet careful, tended to the herbs with practiced ease. There was a quiet elegance in the way he moved, something she had always noticed but never questioned. "You're up early," she said, stepping toward him. He glanced up with a small smile. "The earth does not wait for us, my love." Aisha chuckled, kneeling beside him. Their life together had been one of simplicity, of early mornings spent tending the land, of evenings filled with stories and laughter. They were not wealthy, but they had enough. Idris worked as a merchant, traveling to nearby towns to trade goods while Aisha managed their home. It was an ordinary life, but it was theirs, and she would not trade it for anything. Still, there were things about him that puzzled her. He carried himself differently from the other men in the village. Even in the most casual moments, there was an air of quiet command in the way he spoke, in the way people seemed to regard him with subtle reverence. At the market, the elders greeted him with a respect that was almost unnatural for a mere trader. Even strangers, those who passed through their town, often did a double take when they saw him, their eyes lingering just a moment longer than necessary. She had asked him once, early in their marriage, about his past. "There is not much to tell," he had said with a gentle smile. "I have traveled far, seen many places. But here, with you, is where I have found my home." And she had believed him. Why would she doubt the man who had given her nothing but kindness, who had never raised his voice, never let a day pass without reminding her how deeply she was loved? But as time passed, small things began to gnaw at the edges of her certainty. One evening, as they sat outside watching the stars, she noticed a group of travelers passing through the village. Unlike most strangers who came and went without much notice, these men seemed different. Their clothing was fine, their presence commanding. What unsettled her most, however, was the way they looked at Idris. It was not a look of passing curiosity. It was recognition. One of them even inclined his head slightly, a gesture too formal for a simple merchant to receive. Aisha turned to her husband, expecting to see confusion on his face. Instead, she saw something else entirely, a flicker of tension in his shoulders, a guarded expression that disappeared as quickly as it came. She opened her mouth to ask, but before she could speak, Idris reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "It's a beautiful night, isn't it?" he said, as if nothing had happened. Aisha nodded, though unease settled deep in her stomach. The man without a past. Days turned into weeks, and the feeling did not fade. Every now and then, Idris would disappear for hours without explanation. When she asked, he would smile and say, "Just handling some business." Business that never seemed to have any details. She told herself she was being foolish. Idris had never given her a reason to doubt him. He was a good husband, a man who worked hard and treated her with love. But love did not erase curiosity. Then came the letter. It arrived one morning, delivered by a rider in fine robes. Aisha had been outside collecting laundry when she saw Idris speaking with the messenger. The moment he noticed her watching, he tucked the letter away, his expression unreadable. Something was wrong. That night, as they lay in bed, Aisha traced a finger over the back of his hand. "Who was the messenger today?" she asked, keeping her voice light. Idris hesitated for only a fraction of a second before replying, "An old acquaintance." Aisha's heart clenched. She knew that was not the whole truth. And for the first time in their marriage, she felt the sting of doubt settle between them. Because Idris was not just a simple merchant. And soon, she would learn the truth of the man she had married. Aisha had never been one to question things that did not concern her. She had always believed that trust was the foundation of love, and in her marriage, she had never doubted Idris. But after the arrival of the mysterious letter, An unease settled in her heart, one she could not ignore. Idris had changed. It was subtle at first. He would wake before dawn, disappearing before she could even stir. When she asked about his sudden absences, he would simply smile and say, "There is much to take care of." But what was there to take care of? Their life had always been simple. They had no land to manage, no business that required such secrecy. And then there were the visitors. Strange men arrived at their village, always well-dressed, always searching the streets with keen eyes. They never spoke to Aisha, but she could feel their gaze lingering when she passed. It was not the curiosity of strangers. It was recognition, as if they knew something she did not. One evening, as Idris returned from another unexplained absence, Aisha decided she could no longer keep silent. She waited until they were alone, the flickering light of an oil lamp casting long shadows against the walls of their home. "Who were those men in the village today?" she asked, her voice steady but firm. Idris stilled for a moment, barely noticeable, but Aisha saw it. He set down the basket of dates he had brought from the market and turned to her with his usual unreadable expression. "Travelers, perhaps," he said. "Merchants passing through." Aisha's jaw tightened. They weren't merchants. Silence stretched between them. For the first time, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Hesitation. "You're hiding something from me," she continued, stepping closer. "I see it in the way you carry yourself. The way people look at you. Even the way you avoid my questions." Idris exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping for a moment before meeting hers again. "Aisha," he hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "There are things I have not told you. Not because I wished to deceive you, but because I wanted to protect you." Aisha's heart pounded. "Protect me from what?" Another pause. Then, finally, he spoke. "My past." She stared at him, waiting. "I was not always a merchant," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "Before I came here, before I met you, I belonged to a different world." Aisha's breath hitched. "What kind of world?" His gaze darkened. "One filled with duty, with power, with expectations I could not bear." Her mind spun, trying to piece together his words. "Idris, who are you?" Before he could answer, a knock echoed through their home. Aisha turned sharply, her pulse quickening. Idris's entire body tensed, his hand instinctively moving to the dagger he kept at his waist. Whoever was outside was not just a traveler. Idris looked at her, his expression torn between fear and urgency. "Aisha, no matter what happens, I need you to trust me." Before she could respond, the door swung open. A man dressed in fine robes stepped inside, flanked by 2 guards. His eyes locked onto Idris, and then, to Aisha's shock, he bent his head in a slight bow. "Your Highness," the man said, his voice filled with quiet reverence. "It is time." The air in the room seemed to vanish. Aisha's entire world tilted. "Your Highness." The words echoed in her mind, foreign yet undeniable. She turned to Idris, searching his face for some kind of denial, some kind of reassurance that she had misheard. But there was none. Because for the first time, he did not try to hide the truth. He only looked at her with the sorrow of a man whose secret had finally unraveled. Aisha took a step back, shaking her head. You're a king." Idris's voice was heavy with regret. "I never wanted you to find out this way." The room spun around her. The life she thought she had known, the home, the love, the simple joys they had built together, was no longer real. She had married a king. And she had never known. Her entire world had changed with a single word. And now, she was left with a choice she had never imagined she would have to make. The weight of the words hung in the air, suffocating and undeniable. "Your Highness." Aisha's heart pounded against her ribs as she turned to Idris, searching his face for an explanation that might make this all feel like a misunderstanding. But there was no denial in his eyes. No desperate attempt to undo what had just been revealed. He was a king. The man she had shared a home with, the man she had loved in quiet simplicity, had been keeping a truth far grander than she had ever imagined. The air in the room felt heavier now, the presence of the finely dressed stranger and his guards pressing in on her like an unseen force. Finally, Aisha found her voice. "Tell me it's not true," she whispered. Idris exhaled, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite name. Aisha. Tell me, she repeated, her voice sharper now, trembling with the weight of emotions she could no longer suppress. He hesitated only for a moment before answering. It is true. Aisha stumbled back a step, as if the very foundation of her world had cracked beneath her feet. You married me, lived with me, built a life with me. She shook her head, her mind racing, all while knowing you were a king. I never wanted you to find out this way, Idris said, his voice heavy with regret. I left that life behind, Aisha. I walked away from the throne. Then why are they here? She shot back, motioning toward the stranger and his guards. The man in fine robes finally stepped forward, his demeanor composed but respectful. Because the kingdom cannot wait any longer. His eyes flickered toward Idris. Your people need you, your majesty. Aisha's breath hitched at the title. Her husband. The man who had cooked alongside her, who had laughed with her under the stars, who had held her in his arms on quiet nights, was a ruler of an entire kingdom. And she had never known. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to steady her thoughts. How long? Idris furrowed his brows. How long what? How long were you going to keep this from me? His expression darkened, his hands clenching at his sides. Forever, if I could. The admission knocked the breath from her lungs. Forever. She had never expected riches or power. She had never dreamed of grand palaces or royal titles. All she had ever wanted was an honest love, a life built on trust and devotion. And now, she wasn't sure if she had ever truly had that at all. The stranger spoke again, his voice smooth but insistent. The council awaits your return, your majesty. We cannot delay any longer. Idris let out a slow breath before turning to Aisha. Please, let me explain. A bitter chuckle escaped her lips. Explain. She gestured around them. I think the truth has already been explained for you. His jaw tightened. Aisha, I love you. That has never changed. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to cling to the love they had shared before the weight of his secrets had crashed down upon them. But how could she? You let me live a life built on half-truths, she said, her voice quiet but firm. And now you expect me to just accept this? Idris took a step toward her, his expression pleading. I kept it from you because I wanted us to have a life untouched by duty. I wanted to choose love over obligation. And for a while I did. Aisha met his gaze, her heart aching. But you always knew this day would come, didn't you? His silence was answer enough. The stranger cleared his throat. Forgive me, but time is slipping away. If we do not leave soon, the kingdom will be left vulnerable. Aisha's hands trembled. She could feel the moment slipping from her grasp, the quiet life they had built unraveling before her eyes. She had married a man, never knowing he was a king. And now, she was standing at the threshold of a destiny she had never asked for. Her voice was barely above a whisper. What does this mean for us? Idris held her gaze, his own filled with an emotion she couldn't decipher. That is for you to decide. Her breath caught. Was she ready for this? Could she step into a world of crowns and duty, of royal courts and whispered politics? Could she stand beside a man who had hidden a kingdom from her? The choice was hers. But deep inside, she knew, no matter what she decided, nothing would ever be the same again. Aisha felt as if she were standing at the edge of two worlds, the simple life she had always known and the grand, unfamiliar destiny that had been kept from her. Everything she had believed about her marriage, about Idris, had been rewritten in a single moment. The weight of the revelation settled in her chest, heavy and suffocating. I can't do this, she whispered, barely able to hear her own voice. Idris reached for her hand, but she took a step back, shaking her head. You hid an entire kingdom from me, Idris. How do I begin to understand that? His eyes darkened with regret. I never wanted to deceive you. But you did, she said, her voice trembling. Every day, you woke up next to me, knowing that you were a king and she let out a hollow laugh. I was just a woman who thought she had married a simple man. The man who had addressed Idris as your majesty took a step forward. Forgive me, my lady, but there is no time for doubt. The kingdom is waiting. Their ruler must return. Aisha looked between the stranger and Idris. And what about me? Idris exhaled deeply. That choice is yours. She stared at him, struggling to process what he was saying. You would leave without me? If that is what you want. His voice was quiet, but there was something behind it, a sadness, perhaps even fear. Aisha clenched her hands into fists. You are asking me to walk away from everything I have ever known and step into a world I don't understand. Idris took a step toward her. I am asking you to trust me. A sharp pang struck her heart. Trust. She had always trusted him, loved him without question. But now, doubt clouded every memory, every moment they had shared. Had anything been real? She turned away, pacing as her mind spun with questions. Could she do this? Could she trade her quiet life for one of royal obligations, endless expectations, and a throne she had never wanted? She thought of the small home they had built together, the mornings spent laughing over breakfast, the way Idris had always reached for her hand in the dark. Had that been real? She turned back to him, searching his face. If I go with you, what happens to us? His gaze softened. Then you will be my queen. Aisha's breath hitched. The word felt foreign on her tongue. Queen. She had never dreamed of such a title, had never longed for jewels or crowns. But this wasn't just about royalty, it was about Idris. Could she leave behind the man she loved because of the secret he had kept? Or could she step forward and claim the future that now lay before her? The stranger cleared his throat, his patience clearly wearing thin. Your Majesty, the council expects you within the hour. Aisha inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. Then, finally, she spoke. I will go with you. Idris's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't been sure what she would decide. Relief flickered across his face, though he did not reach for her. Not yet. The stranger nodded approvingly. Then we must leave at once. As they stepped outside, Aisha felt the cool evening air against her skin. A grand carriage awaited them, its golden crest shining in the moonlight. Guards stood at attention, their presence a reminder that this was no longer just a decision between her and Idris. This was history unfolding. She turned to her husband, the man she had loved before she knew he was a king. I don't know how to be a queen, she admitted. Idris finally reached for her hand, his touch steady and sure. Then we will figure it out together. Aisha exhaled slowly, stepping into the carriage beside him. She had married a mystery. But tonight, she was stepping into her own destiny. Not just as Idris's wife, but as his queen.